Hi, good afternoon, guys. Yeah, thanks for the introduction as well. I'll try not to list off all of our customers, but I aim to give you an introduction, a little bit to myself, to Singular, what we're doing here. It's great to be here sponsoring the event for the first time as well, and there's been some great content, so hopefully we can dovetail into some of what we've been learning and what we've been hearing from different areas. Before we go into it, I actually started my career some 15 years ago working on a kind of supply and demand side of sort of the job boards and totaljobs.com and Career Builder, and I've experienced firsthand the mismanagement of supply and demand. So subsequently since then, I've been really working in performance marketing, in search, social, and now very much intelligence to sort of make a better place of that conundrum of balancing equilibrium. So some of the lessons, as mentioned, LinkedIn, Postmates, Lyft, we're going to go into some of our customers just so we can share where we're getting these learnings from. If you haven't heard of Singular, then we're a very well-kept secret by a lot of these marketplaces, so we need to probably do a better job in getting in front of you. Ultimately, we're a marketing intelligence platform, and to constill that is we're making marketing data easier, more efficient. So we're breaking down silos, we are measuring user journeys, and ultimately we're making the data usable and insightful for organizations. And we do that across a huge number of different sectors in marketplaces alone. And they've been referenced heavily today, the Lyfts, the Airbnbs of the world, the Yelps, the LinkedIn as well. But we're also seeing, disruptors. We've got Zillow, which is doing sort of real estate management, WAG that's linking dogs and dog walkers. So marketplaces are cropping up everywhere. Ultimately, I guess what ties this all together is that these are very data-driven organizations and at some scale. So with that, we get to work very closely with them. In fact, we track probably around 10 billion in digital spend per annum. And ultimately, what all these organizations share is making sure that they're getting incremental new users and they're growing profitably and they're scaling properly. So before we jump in, and it's actually dovetails, I don't know who was there for the pack help, but they were talking about founders getting access to data, the tools that they were using. Wanted to give you an idea about what we're actually doing for these organizations, and then we can talk about the data we see and how that works. We are the engine, or this blue single shot, so the single source of truth in the middle. And essentially it's a balance of your marketing investment on the left, so how you spend ad dollars, where you spend them, and understanding that. And that on the right is the business outcome, the attribution of that. What did that user do? Did they buy something? Did they take a ride? Did they make a booking on Airbnb? And marrying those two data sets and combining it ultimately gives you the ability to measure core KPIs, ROI, CAC, LTV, but it needs to be done, first of all, very granularly, timely, but also accurately, and that's kind of what we're going to go into today. So sitting on that data set, we've done a number of co-studies because of the size of the advertisers that we build with, is that we did this with Grow.co, and there's some sort of huge numbers on the right-hand side here, 1.5 billion in ad spend that we looked at. The result of that was 2.7 billion in revenue, so that's always connecting the two. Across 700 million media sources. But what we actually did was we interviewed over 500 marketers whilst we were talking about this to understand, 2020 challenges and how do you grow and how do we piece that together. I'm not talking about the year of big data or data explosion, but we are a data company. The problem is for them is that there's no one single platform that people visit today. They are on multiple devices. The way that you can engage them with digital media, native, video, etc., whether that's on social, whether that's on search, is incredibly challenging. So that top challenge is as much about connecting and collecting that data and actually making some kind of sense of it. Challenge number 2 that they saw was more ad partners. Is often early stage companies will start off with search and social and then try and scale that, but it's inherently competitive, inherently expensive. So during the research of the 500 marketers that we'll come into, they talked about more ad partners equals more scale. So how do you approach that as a marketplace and how do you grow your organization? With all of that, there's the problem of sort of consumer sentiment towards big organizations and you as a marketplace is the growing privacy concerns. So you have things like GDPR, you have changes in legislation in California, but I think it's that sentiment. So what are you collecting and how are you activating that data is important. And then the last point is how do you follow these users around as they bounce from tablets to desktops to mobile, so you can understand, do I invest in web or mobile, and do I invest in supply or do I invest in demand? So to conceal that down, we put it into 3 core areas of marketplace growth. And we believe aligning these 3 are the core bits. And again, I've seen a couple of presentations that just talks about actually just bringing people together to be slightly more aligned and driven from a founder level right the way down to a tactical level, is that are you understanding growth? So I'll cross over these each T's as we go through and try and weave in some of the learnings of the advertisers and the companies we work with. So cross-functional growth, I think, is inherently important, and it's a big shift that we've seen. And this is building out teams that are less about individuals, and it's more actually about creating that data-driven culture. So hiring people for the way that they go about their sort of daily challenges. And we've got a few examples about how people have made major shifts so you can align around data and also align your teams. Because although we're talking about marketplace growth and digital marketing, there's a number of different people that go into that and departments, and we probably need founders and investors and board members and all sorts of others. There's so many bubbles that you could keep adding to this, but we're talking about acquisition, right, in this case, and that could be supply side or demand side, but you need to start with a budget for your finance team. You need to understand which creatives and how to go about marketing yourself. Your BI team has the challenge of weaving this all together, and I think I've seen a couple of things of using hundreds of different tools, or at least 30 in the last presentation, and then weaving that all into Excel. That's not scalable. So in which case, what tools do you use that actually get organizational growth? The product managers are trying to make a kick-ass product that everyone wants to be retained in, but they need to work with the acquisition team to kind of balance supply and demand, so they're not losing users and they're focusing on core areas like retention. So I think there's big challenges, and partly that is because each department is kind of siloed, and often they're working off their own data sets and reporting into different peoples within the organizations. So the kind of past or even the now for a lot of organizations is if you have individual team goals and you're aligning on different data sets, it makes it increasingly difficult to align yourself as an organization. And often what we see is people hiring highly specialized roles, especially within marketing departments, whether that person has a history in optimizing search, for instance. The big shift that we've seen is, again, this cross-functional collaboration, is teams being able to come together and share the same data set. This idea of North Star KPIs is how do we grow as an organization, and how is that data shared from a founder level right the way down to something that's usable. And those KPIs being the same and also agreed around the same data set. And to do that, obviously data-driven individuals that I mentioned, but also using the right technology that grows your business. And a couple of examples that we've worked with, I'll come to LinkedIn because I think it's a good course start, but Airbnb, for instance, Roger mentioned at the beginning of the sort of kickoff about the incredible supply side that they'd done, this kind of heterogeneous approach that met every kind of demand that there could be. But the split in their business was very much between web and that of mobile. So what we've helped is actually bring those two departments together so they can actually measure the increment of a web user versus a mobile user and understand where they should be best investing, whether that be on the mobile apping campaigns or whether that be on their web acquisition campaigns. And I think Lyft's an organization, again, that's been referenced a lot today. For them is they took a very traditional approach of siloing display, programmatic, search and social, all as different specialisms. What we've helped them do is come together again is share learnings and actually build a cross-functional marketing team that's responsible for all channels rather than having these kind of siloed teams that are around. And I think LinkedIn is an interesting one, and really the idea is, going back to that cross-functional team, is that their marketing team actually works like an internal agency, and they're beholden to various different products within the LinkedIn portfolio, whether that be job seekers, whether that be employers, whether that be the marketing sales products, or in fact even user growth. What they found is they were actually then beholden, and Jake Bailey talks about this, is they segmented and created siloed teams. So even if you're just doing a company QBR, internally, you're aligning on probably 5 or 10 different data sets. So Singular really kind of broke down those barriers to give the company a holistic view. And actually across the portfolio, could they analyze return on ad spend and ROI and look at like the sort of portfolio increase and incremental growth of users regardless of the product that they've been acquired through. So I think that one's a particularly prominent thing. And the learning there is people are often put off with Singular about the size of the customer we've got. But if you're even in early stages of growth, is aligning the whole organization around one single source of truth is just a great starting point, because then you can build off it. And every meeting that you have can be aligned around a core data set. So the tactics of like finding that sweet spot or that equilibrium, and we work obviously with a number of different sectors within marketplaces, and we often reference, Postmates and DoorDash and Rappi and Glovo, for instance, who are all searching to balance sort of riders and new deliveries or demand. But I think the problem is there's a war out there in terms of arriving in Berlin, whether I use Free Now or whether I use Uber, and that's product experience, for instance, or whether my credit card suddenly fails on one of the apps. But then there's a war on the impression, because you're on Facebook or you're on Google at the keyword, you're bidding against a myriad of other marketplaces that are in high demand. And then there's the App Store itself is doing everything. Now there are millions of apps where you can achieve goals essentially as a consumer, but then move on to the next app. So I think finding the right balance is, we really talk about sort of the core metrics, which I'll come on to, but you're looking at profitable growth. Profitable growth means that the customer or our customers need to align on ROI, incremental users, the LTV users, and especially on supply and demand, balance the cost of acquisition, or CAC, that keeps coming up. So we talk about growth being a loop and a constant loop and not a funnel, and this idea of pushing users into a funnel, they're likely to go straight out the other side into another pocket. So this kind of 1, 2, 3 approach, or simple, is like you should always be testing channels and understanding as you grow, is our advertisers are in North America, South America, Europe, APAC, etc. There's a different media mix that works for each area. And ultimately, which creatives resonate? How do you test new audiences? And you have to measure those. Are you monetizing these users? And typically, are you retaining them, for instance? And retention's a core thing, because you can acquire a load of users and achieve install numbers or new registrations, but if you're not properly retaining or monetizing them, then it's kind of a flawed business model. So at a top level, again, at a founder level, right the way down, is align on those North Star KPIs of overall ROI or LTV. Like, what does growth actually mean to your organization? Is it just market share and buying installs as Glovo's entering the African markets, Rappi across South America, for instance, is ultimately you can make a loss to begin with, but as you mature, and the Ubers and the Airbnbs and the Lyft, is that they have to optimize and they have to understand those CAC nuances. So I guess the takeaway I take from this is is kind of move quickly, test new partners, and just the research that looks to that is that, again, a lot of people talk about scaling sort of Facebook and Google as they enter. Excellent traffic, high quality, but expensive because you're up against people. 60%, nearly there, 58% of marketers agreed that more partners led to growth. So we did a bit of an investigation into that in the app install market, and for the same budget invested, you could achieve higher scale, but actually a lower cost of acquisition if you were to use 5+ ad networks as well. So it's challenging what you need to do, and then ultimately what to do with that data is, I put this in here as like, just don't spend everywhere. Beat, which is part of intelligent apps based out of Greece, is part of the sort of on-demand or ride-sharing, but they're focused on launching in South America. And actually their driver acquisition predominantly comes through affiliate programs that aren't digital and aren't seen. So he was like, it's not really about just the number, but actually understanding the incremental impact. So he marries up supply side, which is through affiliates, and then has to match that with digital demand as he gets new cities launched and has to get that sort of demand side right as well. The core bit is different people, we've aligned them all around the same data set within Singular as well. So that's at the kind of top level. I talked about sort of maturity and efficiency of acquisition. Again, we're trying to talk about how customers are using us, but also the challenges that they face. And with maturity becomes a particular challenge, and Postmates has too, is that of the efficiency of user acquisition, but the efficiency of that driver acquisition as well. And at some point as a business, as you get a sort of a better understanding of the LTV of your users, and also the stickiness, because riders in the gig economy means that they can go anywhere at any time, as well as you can be a Uber, Lyft, or Bolt driver, for instance, is their optimization came down to what creative resonates. So actually this goes from like a satellite view really down into the weeds of like, how do you acquire the next user? And for this, you need to be able to analyze creative with the same data. So I think in this particular study, it was like Chipotle and Boa Tea that actually resonated more on the demand side. And as a result, they got this kind of increased conversion rate, but critically for them, they decreased their cost per registration. So those are the meaningful metrics. It's not necessarily about conversion rates or click-through rates. It's about actually meaningful users and registrations. So we're not going to do all of that in Excel. That's the good thing. I think automating insights and using the right technologies is something that's come up a lot. And I think, even myself, we're inundated with data in different platforms, and in my role, you're almost sort of forced to glean some kind of insight that provides some kind of business growth. Why did we lose a customer? Why did we lose a user, etc.? So I think from that is this really links back to cross-functional teams, team alignment. Is finance people maybe want to know, our CFOs here, wants to know exactly how much we've spent and kind of why and justify it. Product teams want to know about sort of retention and engagement models, but they access things in different ways. Like creative people want to look at actual videos, images, and actually understand what resonates, for instance. So you have to make data accessible for different people and understandable at different levels, but it has to be done for the organization. And I guess we looked at why it's so important. And this is almost like the efficiency of the trade. If you imagine that you are launching across multiple different countries, multiple different cities, and the VP of Growth at Glovo does a really good talk about going into a casino and being faced with 10 one-armed bandits and having $1 to spend on each. Do you pull them all at the same time? Do you watch someone? Like, how do you go about that? And it's very much like a data-driven process. So here's what these guys need. This is our 2019 700 marketers that we interviewed. You need to be able to link what you're spending with the business outcome. We touched on that, so you can understand who your most profitable users are. You have to be granular. You have to understand publisher creative data, which publishers resonate with which users, on which side of the equation, supply and demand, so you're keeping that equilibrium. And also, we live in a stage where machine learning and AI is probably overused, but you should at least be automating things, and the things that you are automating should identify where you spend your next dollar or where you're getting the best return on ad spend as well. And the reason being is, and this is a slightly more granular slide, which we normally use for the kind of marketing or the UA teams, is these guys are trading on a big stage with big budgets, big investments, and there's important outcomes to it. So the reason when we talk about granularity, I just thought I'd use this as you scale, is that you need to understand these different points of, refreshing creative may give you more scale. Blacklisting publishers that you don't think are going to work or don't work will increase ROI, but then you're not advertising as many places. Then you need to understand how you're competitively bidding. The war on Lyft and Uber that keeps on being sort of raised is the same as Postmates and DoorDash, and there's variable different analogies in every single market. So you've got to remember who you're bidding against and make sure that you're applying budgets, etc., so you win the next impression to win the next user as well. So these optimization levers, this is the same data that should then feed up to the top and the founder level in terms of them understanding overall metrics like ROI and return on ad spend. So we put Alok Gupta is particularly interesting, mainly because, not because he's at Lyft, and I know they're referenced a lot, is he actually started life on Wall Street and moved to the West Coast. But when we were talking about creating a data-driven organization, I think he's the sort of antithesis of it. He moved to Airbnb to kind of explain, sort of look at things in the same way, as like you're kind of buying users or you're kind of trading in the likes of how you grow and how you optimize growth. So we met him at Airbnb, and then he's now head of marketing sciences at Lyft, and again, that's been referenced, sort of Lyft's sort of downward spiral and how it's going to kick back up and as they go towards profitability. So they've aligned their data set using, for instance, someone like Singular, but they've actually employed a product and a marketing science team that's building automation on top of us. And that's what we're seeing as one major trend as well, is automation doesn't just have to come from a third party. Is if you have the right data and it's yours and you're aligned on it, then you can actually put your BI and your engineering resources into doing what they do best, which is innovating. And often what we find is they're misaligned, collecting data, hashing it into Excel and doing things that really should be automated at scale. So I think he points out, going back to those kind of optimization levers, that optimization is actually quite easy because there's a number of platforms and there's the kind of knowledge to do it. The really hard part is measurement. And once you've got measurement right, then you understand exactly who you should be acquiring and where you should be acquiring as well. So to try and bring it all together and leave a little bit time for questions, more bubbles, which our marketing team loves, but tech should bring everyone together, and ultimately it's in the pursuit of uncovering insights to grow. And again, we try and bring this back to founders talking to small teams. It doesn't just have to be the scaled organizations that we're talking about here. Get this foundation right and you're able to build and scale off the top of it. The worst thing you want to come is across these hurdles as you're scaling, is get the infrastructure right to begin with. So that starts with attribution, is measure everything, measure at the user level, understand where these users are going, build an analytics on top of it, make sure that you have performance analytics, make sure you have raw data that your BI can take, make sure you have creative reports that are visually appealing for your creative team, and make sure that you understand how you're monetizing your users. Once you've got those users, how are you using them? Audience segmentation and building out, lookalike them, understand high value to long tail, etc., is fundamentally important. And a bit that we actually spend a lot of time on is fraud. If you are at this guy's scale or you're scaling yourself, is you need to know that these are real users to begin with, whether that be in the web world or certainly in the mobile app install world, is that, and the sophistication of fraud is incredibly high now that you can be spoofed into thinking someone has registered or even taken a ride in a car and it's actually a bot running a script in the cloud. So I think the fraud prevention bit is like you need to be protected, so you need to build that in. And then it goes back to where you started, which is your product, right? Which is, are you having a best-in-class user experience? How are you engaging with those users? And I guess it goes back to, I think, Roger's first slide of comparing Uber and Lyft and having completely the same products, and how does that user make a choice? So differentiating yourself or engaging like that with a user in another way. So I think tying those all together, that's really about unifying that marketing data and also unifying your organization as well. So just in 3 takeaways. So empower cross-functional growth teams, and I think that's even from hiring, is hire data-driven individuals and hire individuals that are willing to do more or bridge the gaps between previously siloed teams. Test, measure, iterate, and do it fast. It's as much about failure and getting to data sufficiency with failure. It's a focus I didn't take on the last phase, but the faster you do it, the more you can invest in the right areas that scale. and build, I should say buy, because I'm on the stage, buy technology that aligns your teams and automates the insights you needed to grow. It's like what you shouldn't be doing is working offline or working with a number of tools that are creating data fragmentation. Because if you're doing that, you are not sort of weeks behind, years behind. Is real-time optimization and real-time growth is the pursuit of sort of every advertiser, in this case, every marketplace. So I think that's a very important one. That's it. Thank you very much.
Neil, thank you very much for your fantastic presentation. We still have a minute or two for any questions that you have.
Thank you. This is a little selfish question. So I'm in a position to buy some of these services, and let's assume Singular is way too expensive because we're just launching our product. What is the key element startups at the early stage would use to decide who's the right fit for them and who's going to provide the right service of data, analytics, marketing, etc.?
Yeah, that's a fair question. Don't be put off. I'm not going to go into price, by the way, but I think the main thing is we start every process. It's like, does the whole organization understand what the growth goal is, right? So if you start there, is then you need to utilize the right technologies to do that. You need two things. You need to be able to attribute on web and on mobile. So you always start there because you need to measure the outcomes of every advertising campaign. The analytics side is important, as you need to collect every creative, every dollar spent, etc., and like that. So you may start using tools. I mean, Singular in its name, it is both. I would also speak to the market, is understand what they're using. What tends to happen with technology companies is they think that they can build it first. And the build versus buy, I think, is a misuse of engineering time. So buy the right technologies, but be brave enough to test them and stop using them if they don't scale.
Hi Neil, thanks for that. Great presentation. I wanted to ask you, with influencer marketing being such a big channel at the moment and only growing, is that something you guys measure? And if so, is there any insight against how that's performing against the more traditional channels at the moment from you?
Yeah, I mean, yes, it is something that you can measure. I think that goes back to sort of measure everything. It's difficult to measure because Facebook and Google will claim everything because they see everyone. So you need a measurement partner which is agnostic across all channels. And what that tends to work on is some kind of last click attribution. Who got the click on the ad last in the last 7 days? Influence market kind of works outside of that sphere as well. So I think it comes down to the organizational investment in it. I was talking like Depop, which is like reinventing sort of vintage clothes market and supply. Is like they're kind of entering the more hipster market, for instance. So I think it's knowing your market and then measuring and knowing that you're going to have to do some kind of proportionate measurement around it. Is like there are companies that are investing in that particularly, but I think if you just go down that route, is that you miss out on the bigger picture, and ultimately it should make up search, social, programmatic influence as well.
But can you add it to your Singular platform?
Yes, indeed, because it's something that can be tracked. If it's activity where a user is engaged with the content, or yes, it's definitely something that can be tracked, yeah.
Perfect.
All right, anyone else? Last question? Yeah, got it covered. Awesome, thank you
All
very
right,
much,
thanks a lot.
Neil.